Now don't adjust your screens, this is in fact a real car you can buy today. It's not a rolling concept car. This is the Hyundai STARIA and it's taking on the likes of the Volkswagen Transporter and the Mercedes V-Class. Now this is one of the most spacious people movers you can buy today, and I think it's the coolest looking one out there as well. But does it have the substance to match its futuristic styling? Well, this is Product Review Cars, my name's Cameron, and let's find out. Now, when I first saw images of the STARIA, I thought that's a really cool concept van, but it's never gonna make it here to Australia, nor is it gonna look like that when it finally comes out on the road. But of course, I was proven wrong. Here it is on Australian soil, and it looks just like the images promised. I love the monobrow effect LED up front, very cyberpunk-esque. The low-mounted headlights look great. The aero-design wheels and the pixel effect taillights complete with rolling indicators. This thing is a monolithic looking machine. And it's this sleek design which had more heads turning for this particular car than many other cars that I test for this job. One of the cars that I was testing at the same time was the Genesis GB70, and that did not get nearly as many looks, even though that was fresh out on the market, as this thing did. This thing turned heads as if it was a Lamborghini rolling down the street. In here, there are over 10 cup holders, there's 8 seats, there's 6 USB charging ports, there are 4 window blinds, there are 4 storage bins, there are 2 sunroofs, and there's a camera to check what's happening in the back seats from the driver's point of view. Now, it's not just a pretty looking interior, it's very functional. There are inbuilt cup holders up on the dash. There are 2 storage bins in front of me, although one of them does block the driver's display if that ever breaks, so just keep an eye on that. There's also a pass-through, so there's no transmission tunnel or exhaust tunnel impeding for me to be able to step through from one side of the car to the other. It's got a massive storage bin here in the middle. It's like a table. You can put big items in, like a camera bag, for example, and have that all locked away from prying eyes looking onto the interior. It certainly feels like a camper van in terms of its practicality up front. And now there is a digital driver's display in front of me, and also another 10.25-inch display, which is the infotainment unit, which looks very reminiscent of the one we tested in the Tucson. Additionally, this wheel is exactly the same as the one in the Tucson, which is nice because it's not too big. It's very car-like and familiar for any drivers who haven't been in a van before. It's not a foreign environment to be driving in. This display up front, the driver's display, changes depending which drive mode you're in, and it provides all the information you might need in a car like this. It's a great display, and it doesn't even have a binnacle cover. It is just standing up on its own, and it's set far enough back where it is really easy to view when looking outside the van. Although I will say that the steering wheel can get a little bit in the way of the information down the bottom, and so you just have to adjust that to find the right space for you, or adjust these electric seats up front to adjust your height. Now, this 10.25-inch display in the middle has all the similar features we've seen in Kia and Hyundai's cars. It's got that same app-like layout, except 2 things that are unique for this car, like I mentioned, is the camera system, so you can keep an eye on what's happening out back, although people can see when you're using that, so if you have kids that are easily distracted, they might even misbehave even more if they can see themselves on camera in a screen up front. And then there's also a 3D camera view of this car, very much like BMW and some higher end Hyundais and Genesis cars. You can scroll around and get a third-person perspective of this van, albeit it is the 12-seater version of the car used as their model, and it's a white van instead of a color-matched version and 8-seater specific version for the Australian market. And a cute little quirk, the air recycling icon is a little STARIA van, and what's cool is that that comes on automatically when it senses you're approaching a tunnel, which is great, and I really love that. Capacitive buttons, not loving so much. Now, of course, when I grabbed this van, I had to load it full of friends and family to really make the most of this and, you know, share the experience, which is what this van's all about. There is plenty of knee room, I mean excess of. I'm sitting in the middle seat to present this to you, for goodness sake. Like, I never really do that because this middle seat is usually the worst seat in the house, but in here, it's one of the best because you get one of the best views out of this car. There are nice leather seat pockets. There's even, you know, ability to recline these seats backwards so you can get a really nice sort of comfortable sleeping position. So on longer trips, you will really enjoy yourself. There's also controls for the climate controls back here. So, you know, it feels like you've got a bit more independence back here. And there are 2 USBs and a little storage bin in the center console. And obviously these cup holders which stick out, which is just very handy for anyone jumping in the back. Now, what's also cool is that it's got these massive windows here, although it would be a bit of a shame if they didn't open because of all the things that are going on in this car. But instead what they do is that they have a manual operation. So you can slide them open like this and you get a nice sizable window. Now, if there's too much light coming in, you can pull down the window blind. It is far bigger than a shade. This thing also comes from the top rather than from the bottom, and that blocks out plenty of light there. There's also plenty of light coming from this larger second sunroof, and there's air vents around, so you're going to be very comfortable on a long trip back here. Now, this third row is not as comfortable as I would have liked, and I'm sure it's not as comfortable as what Hyundai intended either. And I believe it's because of Australian crash safety ratings. This is as far back as the third row can go, and obviously why we don't get the 12-seater option here in Australia. It's restricted to this limit, and so it means you do get restricted knee room back here, although you have plenty of feet room underneath. There's also a window shade here, which is again useful to block out any additional light. And then there's plenty of cup holders and 2 places to charge for your USB connectivity points. So look, third row is not the worst. It's certainly a little bit more comfortable than it was in the Carnival, and it's going to be more comfortable and spacious for adults, even compared to some 8-seater SUVs. But look, it's not as comfortable as it could have been, and sadly I believe that's just because of Australian crash safety ratings. And so look, this is as good as it gets in this segment for a third row. Now, I think a 2001 Space Odyssey theme is very appropriate for the absolute size of this boot opening. This is almost bigger than some inner city garage doors. This is massive, and what it does is that it leads you into 1,303 liters of storage space back here. And that's with the seats all up too. That means you can bring 8 people and their stuff mostly fitted on the inside, and then you can either throw things on a roof pod or tow up to 2.5 ton braked with the STARIA and use a trailer instead. Now, it is ridiculously roomy back here, so much so that when my mates and I went on that road trip, we then had to get some food, obviously, because that was the point of the trip, and we all sat in the back and were able to use this like a bench. But then we realized these third row seats create a bench-like experience in the back of the STARIA. So it means that when it's pouring with rain or the weather's a little bit lame, you can have plenty of people hanging out underneath the boot, sitting on the boot lip and sitting on this makeshift bench, and really have an experience to take over the split tailgate party experience that someone like Range Rover might offer. Okay, so we have a 2.2 litre 4-cylinder turbocharged diesel under the bonnet. It produces 130 kilowatts and 430 Newton meters of torque. If you ask me, that's plenty of power for a car like this when you're driving around town. You can get a petrol V6 option, but you're going to lose on the perkiness of having an extra turbocharger. You can have worse fuel economy, and to be honest, the extra weight and 2-wheel drive option doesn't seem as appealing as this all-wheel drive diesel version. Now, what I love about the STARIA is its driving position. It is commanding, and you can just see everything you need to see with all these windows really easily. And then you take in the steering. The steering is very, very dead. There's nothing in terms of feel here. What you're going on is just sort of how the bus responds to your steering input. But it's not a bad thing because it's really good and really easy for when you're driving around town, and you know, it doesn't require a whole lot of effort to keep on steering. It is very light on its feet for a van of this size. And what I love is the all-wheel drive system. It just gives me a bit more confidence driving a van like this. I'm not so worried about understeer when going into corners a little bit too fast, but in saying that, the dimensions of this car are just enormous, and I would definitely recommend taking this as slow as you can around corners, especially when you start loading it up. It is a ginormous van, and even though they've tried to make it as low as possible without, you know, impacting clearance rates and all that sort of stuff for driving around town, Hyundai still, you know, have built a massive van that feels very, very wafty. It does lean a lot, and so going through corners, it is flat up to a point, and then you can sort of feel physics take over and the top heaviness of this car, thanks to the glass on the roof and obviously how upright and skinny this car is. It's gonna, yeah, feel a little bit like it's gonna tip if you go way too fast through a corner. Now, I'm sure there's plenty of skilled drivers like, you know, Sabine Schmidt, who, you know, drove vans on the Nürburgring and they didn't have any issues with those things tipping over. But I just think that you just want to drive this a little bit more carefully, even though it's very much like driving a car. Now, I also love the driving aids in here. So you've got blind spot cameras, and you've also got radar cruise control with lane centering and lane keep assist. So it really makes it nice and easy when you got two solid white lines and on cars in front of you, just to keep on cruising around. It is like a living room on wheels when you have heaps of people in here. You can just sort of be in your own space, and you don't really feel like you're with traffic. Instead, you feel like you're above it or you're removed from it, and you're just watching what's going on the outside, because this car is so easy to drive. I was a little bit scared at first. I was like, yeah, I'm not so sure about driving this thing. It is massive. But as long as you can find a car space long enough, the width of this thing and the ability for it to steer quite easily, and actually has a really good turning circle for a van of this size, yeah, it's manageable. And I could see someone using this as a family car, no problems. However, I'd probably recommend you own a garage or something like that. And on top of owning that garage, I definitely wouldn't recommend having a underground garage, because this thing in our underground garage just missed the roof. It hit the little antenna, and if it was any higher than this, it would have definitely hit the roof. So just keep that in mind when you have to park it. And as much as I love that 3D surround camera, it ain't all that helpful for what you need it to do most of the time. So it looks really good, and it's good for spying big objects, but for fine-tuned parking, I just use the other cameras there to get into my spot, and also these massive mirrors and Ford F-150-like window line just to be able to see out the side. Now this is a ton of fun. It's very comfortable, it looks great, and it's feature packed. On top of all that, it's priced really well, and I think deserving of being called People Mover / Van of the Year. And I think, at least in owning the van segment, this leads the charge for 2021, because it's got styling, features, and a price point and a driving experience fitting for a van of this year. Where a lot of other vans on the market are just feeling a little bit overpriced for what they're offering in 2021, where they're starting to feel a little bit old. Now, this is a funny one, because if you have been shopping for an 8-seater, I probably would still push you towards something like a Hyundai Palisade if you didn't really want to deal with the hassles of driving a van like this, where a Hyundai Palisade will go pretty much anywhere you want it to, and it's a little bit shorter in its dimensions, so that third row is really if you're using it on occasion. This is really for people who know that they want all that extra space, and of course are frequently using that third row. That's where this comes in handy, but it obviously does have some compromises, like every van does, like its ride height, access into smaller car parks, and obviously its length. But everything else, this thing does superbly. And it's also extremely entertaining with its interior features and space, and also its looks and design. I love driving this car, puts a smile on my face, and I think it is definitely one of the best vans out there on the market. Now, what would also put a smile on my face is if you could hit that subscribe button to help support the channel and help get us to 2,000 subscribers before the end of the year. Now, thank you so much for watching. My name's Cameron, this is Product Review Cars, and I'll see you in the next one.